All right. This is going on the internet, Brandon. Comb your
Are
hair.
you wearing a Dead Poet shirt from your best friend Barry?
From his bachelor party. Look at you. You
Wow, look at
actually
you.
looking at me. You got us
Wow.
all dead poet
Ooh,
shirts.
wow. I
It was
didn't
a
get
great
one. I
time.
I didn't get to go.
Oh, you didn't. Oh, well,
No,
Kirk
I
was
didn't.
there, and
Yeah, I know all his best friends are there. I
oh,
just marginal friends like myself didn't get to go.
Greg Vandenbosch was there.
Yeah, all his best friends. Ed, who punched
Paul Yancey was
Kirk in the
there.
face. Didn't
Ed
uh
was
didn't
there.
Ed punch
Yeah,
somebody in the face at that party?
Ed was there. Ed was there. Call us
Good
all
times.
gay.
Good times.
Andrew Keller was there.
Did he call you all gay?
Oh yeah.
Oh, all right. Let's do this.
All right, coming down at 3-2-1. Brandon, I don't know if you're paying attention to the news, but there's some banks in the news.
Ooh,
Here's the headline today from
thanks.
Forbes magazine. Silicon Valley Bank, how a bank fails. This comes from Bill Connerly. He's a senior contributor. Once again, I'm assuming there's no Woke-A-Maga meter on how a bank gets failed, Brandon.
No, this is just straightforward news. I mean, it's just reporting on it. I mean, although he is giving sort of, I guess, some editorial comment on banks, but I feel like this is pretty straightforward and it would be really hard he could be woke, he could be MAGA, but it doesn't come across in this article. That's my point.
I'm going to read some snippets of the article, and it's basically talking about how a bank fails. It's a little bit long, but I'm going to try to read it so that my mom can understand it, Brandon. She's 85, so give her a break, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Silicon Valley Bank shut down by regulators on Friday, March 10th in the largest bank failure since 2008. Okay, it's good to know. Pretty good view of how this happens. A bank takes in deposits from customers who could be individuals or businesses, then it invests most of those deposits in loans or securities, but keeps some of that cash on reserve for when us depositors want our money back. Silicon Valley Bank was not your typical bank, as most of their deposits came from large companies that are part of the tech sector. That's pretty important to learn there. Most banks put the bulk of their assets into loans, but most banks have many small depositors who don't need their money back suddenly. So Silicon Valley Bank put most of its assets into U.S. Treasury securities. There's no credit risk, so it sounds safe. Best yields usually are on long-term bonds rather than short-term bills. The problem with long-term bonds, Brandon, this is important, is when interest rates rise, the value of old bonds that still pay the old interest rates go down. So Silicon Valley Bank's parent company, SVP, reported at year-end in 2022 that its bonds were worth $117 billion, but had been purchased for $127 billion. So you see, they lost $10 billion there. Then everybody wants their money back. There's somewhat of a run on the bank. Hence, Silicon Valley Bank.
There was a veritable run on the bank.
So there you go. That's sort of setting up how a bank fails, specifically Silicon Valley Bank.
Well, that's just sort of one way it fails. I mean, in the case of Silicon Valley Bank, it also failed because it wasn't diversified. It was almost entirely in the tech sector. So as there's a number of things going on. Number one is that the interest rates went up and they were gambling. And that's one of the problems with this whole thing is that they were gambling. And there was a thing called the Glass-Steagall Act back. It was passed Glass-Steagall, right after I think it's Glass-Steagall. I might be mispronouncing it, but right after the stock market crash in 29, Congress passed this law. It said banks could no longer be in the securities business. That meant that you couldn't be a bank and also sell stocks, right? Because they were saying that banks can't be gambling, buying stocks in the stock market. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you say. It is gambling. You are gambling that the stock is going to go up, and somebody else who's shorting a stock is gambling that it's going to go down. So you're playing against it. Not everybody can win in the market, right? And so they're gambling on this. They gambled on their depositors' money with these long-term purchases, but they were affected
which are
by
the safest of the bets.
Right. It was a safe bet for sure. Absolutely. But I can't remember exactly what the reasoning behind, but they had some serious miscalculations, right? That they had done. And what was going on is that many of these tech companies, which are volatile to start with, got scared. They were like, "Uh-oh, we want to pull our money out of here." So there was a good old fashioned, It's a Wonderful Life run on the bank, and that's what happened. And so Silicon Valley Bank is not like it's not
I'd never heard of
Different than
Silicon
any other-
Valley Bank before,
I
and I
had.
live in the Bay Area.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's not it's not one of those things where ultimately most people would go into Silicon Valley Bank like the B of A or Wells Fargo or
Yeah.
whatever else. This was an investment bank, pretty much. I don't even know if you could have
You can.
individuals could
Yeah.
have their own.
Yeah,
Could
you can.
individuals have an
Yeah.
account with Silicon Valley Bank?
Yeah.
But I think the majority of their money came with tech, in the tech sector. I know that my buddy said to me before the bailout happened, because there was a bailout of it. So the Biden administration guaranteed the people that had deposited their money that it would be there, and then they're going to sell off
FDIC.
the assets. Yep. Yeah, but the FDIC is a little bit different. The FDIC only guarantees up to $250,000 per deposit. So these people had millions and millions of dollars in there, and Biden administration said we're gonna guarantee all the deposits, not just 250,000. We're gonna do it, and in fact, they're going to look at the FDIC to see how they, the
Just to
problem with the
explain, FDIC is that banks
again,
have to put money.
after the Great Depression, when people lost everything because of bank failures, the government passed a law, basically, or created an agency called the Federal Deposit Insurance Commission that basically said that if you have money in a bank, we will guarantee up to a certain amount. That's why I say individuals should not have their money all in one bank.
But it's the banks that put the money into the FDIC. It's not
Right.
taxpayer dollars. It's
right.
a
It's
percentage of the
insurance.
money that the banks
Exactly.
have.
Exactly. So, but the banks aren't guaranteeing every penny, and so there was a run on this. Now,
Yeah.
how banks work are banks will take in money, from depositors. They don't keep that money in a vault. It's not like Gringotts in Harry Potter. They don't have big old piles of gold, Scrooge McDuck style. What they do is they take the money and they invest it in things like long-term mutual funds or stock, whatever it is they're doing. But they have to keep a certain amount of money on hand in case people want any of their capital back. The problem is if everybody wants their capital back all at once, it's almost impossible for these banks to liquidate their long-term investments to be able to pay back the depositors their money. So it is sort of a mutual trust. A lot of times banks will have a thing where you can't pull your money out within a certain time frame, like 60 days or 30 days. You can't just pull your money out.
Well, let's just back up to the start of mankind. Money
Okay.
is trust in general with humankind. Like that's money
it
has no
meaning,
value,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, whatever you're doing is a trust. The reason why American banks have done so well is because the country is so strong that people trust that the banks are going to be there and
The
protect.
country's so strong, and then the world thinks that the dollar is so strong. So that's
Right.
why the dollar is such an important.
Absolutely, because if you walk into somebody, I would teach my students this. If I walk into a store and I offer, I say I want to buy a Snickers bar, and I give the guy, a $5 bill, and he looks at me, he's like, "I'm not taking this." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I'll only take euros today." I'm like, "What?" It's like, "Yeah, I'm not going to take the American dollar anymore." I mean, it's just a piece of cloth, right? I mean, it's not even paper; it's a piece of cloth, and it's only worth what someone's going to put value on it. So ultimately, there is a trust innately in the system.
By the way, just going back again, money is really amazing in that, like in the old days in the feudal systems, like I harvested apples for a living, and another guy did shoes, and another guy was a lawyer. Like I would have to trade my apples for a shoe.
Yeah, it's called the barter
to a lawyer.
economy.
But what if a lawyer didn't want apples? So then, but I only got apples because that's my job. So that's where money comes into.
Well, a barter economy doesn't work in a bigger scale. A barter economy works if it's small. Ultimately, in the feudal system, people didn't even travel further than 5 miles from their house. And that's where money came in, is that they started these market fairs.
Yeah.
So people would show up with their excess goods. And then there was somebody that said, "Hey, you know what? I'm just going to post up here all year long. And in fact, I'll give you a piece of paper. Maybe you want to bring your apples in, but you don't need anything right then and there." Said, "I'm going to give you in a sense, an IOU, so that when you do come in here and want to buy something, we can do that."
Let's just not to get too deep in the weeds, but
Sure.
money is really amazing. It gets a little complicated when we start talking about banks.
Can't buy
and
you
how they
love,
fail.
Larry.
The thing that kind of ticks most of us off is that, surprise, surprise, the rich are getting richer, and not that the rich are getting richer, that the rich are getting bailed out. Silicon Valley Bank doesn't do their due diligence and have enough money on hand and is gambling, as you mentioned. And now guess who's going to bail them out? The federal government, which is essentially me, the taxpayer.
Right.
And this is what happened in 2008. This is what happened. This is what happened. The Great Depression. It's not going to change.
Well, they didn't get bailed out in the Great Depression, which is why we had a Great Depression. But
the bottom line is that the rich will always get bailed out by us, the middle class,
because we can't afford not to bail them out. Because if it would kill everything if we didn't.
Yeah.
The problem is we don't have these stopgap measures. Like, for instance, one of the big controversies right now is I don't know if this has been substantiated or not, but there is a lot of speculation that the top C-suite people were paid out bonuses the day before the bank collapsed. Right. They knew it was coming and they paid out their bonuses and then they all fled. Well, you know what? They shouldn't get their bonuses. Your bonus would be if the bank is still in working order and you did the right thing.
Bad news.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
They're going to get their bonuses.
Yeah. And it's sad. And that's my point, is that let's take those bonuses and say, sorry, dude, you're going to pay back for this bank because you are responsible for it. That's the problem with corporations, is corporations are treated as if they're human beings when they're not. So the people that are underneath that corporate umbrella say, oh, it's not my fault. It's the corporation's fault. So again, Joe taxpayer gets screwed yet again. I don't want to sound like Bernie here, but there is something to that, right? There is something to the fact that people keep getting the little guy, or ultimately the taxpayer keeps getting screwed over. So ultimately, there needs to be something put in place to stop these places from doing it. And here's the problem. What they always argue is they say, well, if we put these like Glass-Steagall, if we put this in place, then it handcuffs us and it hurts the little guy because he can't make as much money as he normally could if we weren't held down by this. The problem is that we can't trust them. They're going to do this over and over and over, and they have always done this. We have to put these measures in place.
If I could get you to say Glass-Steagall about 4 more times for the end of this podcast, it's going to be a success. Number 2, if we could just fix the banking system like you proposed, it'd be great if you could also then work on banning the internet, which you also propose all the time too. So I feel like you're on a roll of how we're really going to fix the nation.
Listen, dude, all I know is Glass-Steagall was put into place, and it was highly effective. We didn't have a run on a bank for 75 years. Glass-Steagall goes into effect. The stock market goes crazy. And all of a sudden, for 10 years, the market was off the charts. And then what happens? 2008, all these banks involved.
It doesn't go on a heater forever.
No. Now, the market has outperformed everything else over the last 110 years. There's only been one 10-year period in the last over 100 years where the market is not outperformed. And that was not even the 2008 or the Great Depression. It was actually some weird like 95 to 2005, right? So ultimately, this is really complicated, and that's why the Fed's involved, and that's why everybody's involved. The Biden administration is going to get criticized for bailing out. People are like, oh, but they couldn't afford. My buddy called me. I was having dinner with him on Friday night, and we were talking about this. He's like, yeah, my CEO, he works for a tech startup. He's like, my CEO said they didn't know if they were going to be able to pay us on Monday, payday. They didn't know where their money was.
If you listen on David Sachs and all those libertarians in Silicon Valley that are like, why are we bailing these people out? And then their bank needs to bail out and they're screaming for the money. I heard someone say it's like socializing the losses and privatizing the gains. This bank, Silicon Valley, gets to make its bets, and if they don't come clean, we socialize their losses. But if they make money, are we getting a cut of that? No, the average person is not.
Right. And that's the whole point. And their argument is always, yes, but we're vital to the economy, and you won't be able to buy stocks if we don't have it, and startups don't happen, and jobs don't take place because we didn't invest the money in those things. That's their argument.
And in theory, it's kind of right.
Right. But the problem is, again, we don't have measures in place to guarantee that they're going to do the right thing. They keep doing. Greedy people will continue to be greedy. It's the bottom line. That's what it is. So we as individuals need to be willing to accept the fact that the market is going to be a little slower. Our stocks are not going to make as much. Our retirements aren't going to go as big. If we put these things in place, that's the agreement we're going to have to make.
Brandon, I feel like I need to teach you that America, we supersize everything. And so we want the big returns, and then essentially we have to pay for the failures. So Brandon, I'd like to hear it one more time before we leave.
Glass-Steagall, baby.
Thank you.